Shalom and welcome to another Chamor podcast from Bay Abedan, teaching Noahide Judaism for Messianic Hebrews. It is Friday, the 31st of January, 2025, and I have in the studio with me JC. JC is a new friend. We've been chatting a couple of times over sort of coffee mornings and some telephone conversations that have past couple of weeks. And he's very good at keeping me on track with regards to describing the origins of Islam. So we thought it would be a good idea to just record our chats for the benefit of anybody else who wants to listen in to our conversations. And as he sort of picks my brains to try and help describe the origins of Islam in a clear and succinct sort of way. Okay, so JC, do you want to do any kind of introduction for yourself? You can put this on your channel later. JC also has his own channel. I'll put a link to his channel below so you can subscribe afterwards. So JC, as you like, just introduce yourself as much as you want to.
Well, rather than having like a full introduction, is what you have said before. I am just another guy who is actually trying to figure out what happened with Islam and how it all began, because everything seems to be very, very messy, particularly once you start reading their actual traditions. You see lots of things that don't really make sense, they don't fit, and we are trying to put all of those pieces together. And everybody has like different pieces of this really huge jigsaw puzzle, and I'm trying to actually speak with people who have access to different source data, and they can actually paint a better picture of what actually happened. And so far, almost everything that I have seen, everything points in a very specific direction. Everybody is coming at it from very different source data and approach, but everything seems to be pointing towards, okay, Islam began in this manner. And when we spoke before, your data is something that is not really discussed by many people out there, and it really fits really well with absolutely everything, the context. And it was an eye-opener to see all of these sources that you actually have read and that you know of, and it gives a lot of context to what happened. So looking forward to, well, we've already started the conversation earlier, and you were talking about how things began even from way before Islam, which is very crucial to actually understand how we got to the 610s to the 650s, and then this religion really begins to take form in some way. So this really an eye-opener to see when you go back to before the time of Islam, before even the time of Muhammad, and saying, well, these things were actually there, because it really helps paint the picture. Islam didn't really begin because someone just said, here you have it, you have a nice book, and this is what we follow. So looking forward to see what things I can learn from you today, and I will do my best to ensure that we don't go to talk to the late Umayyads or the Abbasids, and we keep everything in that very important period of time when things are very, very messy, and we see how things really began to take form. So
right, yeah. So we started at we're going to write down a chronology together, and I think that said the first date that we should look at is in 523 is the correct date that I want to give you. 523 in the Himyarite kingdom, and this is like 100 years before Islam, and it's the first mention in Arabic of Muhammad as the messenger of God, as basically God's representation or maybe even manifestation. And it's in the Himyarite inscription, and it refers to the Jewish Messiah as an angel, as an angelic manifestation of God. Now in Judaism, that is the spirit of God, which is mentioned in the book of in the book of Genesis, I should say, the first book of the Bible, not the last book of the Christian Bible, the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, line 2, second verse of the first chapter, says the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And in Judaism, the interpretation, what is the Spirit of God? This Spirit of God is the soul of the Messiah. That's what Judaism teaches. This is the soul of the Messiah. So this soul of the Messiah is referred to as Muhammad in these Himyarite inscriptions 100 years before Islam, the year 523. So that's the first thing we bear in mind, and that's a big challenge for the standard Islamic narrative, because you've got Muhammad as the messenger of God 100 years before Islam, and that's a serious issue. So that's where it starts, and then we jump forward into the 600s. Now, in the 600s, we'll take where did I go next after?
Well, next you actually went to 590s.
All right, the 590s. Okay, so in the 590s, we've got basically the persecution of what we have in it is we have to go to Persia. So we're looking at the reign of Khosrau II, and in there are differences of opinion exactly when this happens, but it's in the 590s. Khosrau II puts the Jewish exilarch, the Pharisee exilarch. The exilarch is the leader of the Jews who are the scribes and the Pharisees in Persia. His name is Hanini, and Khosrau II puts him to death. He executes him for supporting Bahram the sixth in opposition to him, and so he's not happy about Haniniah, so he puts Haniniah to death. And the next thing we know after that is about the same, I suppose, about the same time in the province of Orientalis, which is in South Iraq, between sort of Iraq and Syria. If you think of Iraq as sort of Mesopotamia, the Roman province of Mesopotamia, and Syria as the Roman province of Syria, then between Syria and Mesopotamia, you have this Roman province of Orientalis, which is very important. That's where it's all happening. Orientalis is a very important thing, and it's basically part of the Lakhmid kingdom. And in around 602, the last Lakhmid king, who's Nu'man the Third, betroths his daughters to makes an arranged marriage with the parents of Hani ibn Qabisa, so that his daughters marry Hani ibn Qabisa, or will marry Hani ibn Qabisa when Hani ibn Qabisa is grown up. So that's another important thing to be aware of. Nu'man the Third is the last of the Nasrid leaders of the Lakhmid kingdom. Nasrids are very important. They were probably some kind of adoptionists, which is usually called Nestorian or Nasra in the Islamic stories. Okay, then in 610 or 610, this is an important time. In 610, we have something called a deoccultation of Mars takes place, which is visible in Hira in South Iraq. And at this time, it's probably taken as a good omen, because Khosrau II sends his army to go and conquer the Holy Land in the 610s. And he has appointed somebody called Nehemiah ben Hushiel to be the leader of the Jews in his empire. There is no more exilarch in control. The exilarch has been abolished. The scribes and the Pharisees are no longer in favor with Khosrau. They do have a Gaon who is leading a school of religious studies, of Jewish studies in the Persian Empire, but there is no more exilarch in power at this time. Instead, Khosrau II has appointed this person, this Karaite or Sadducee type Karaite, who's called Nehemiah ben Hushiel, and he's controlling the army of Jews, which Khosrau sends in the 610s. He sends them to go and conquer the Holy Land. Am I being clear so far?
Yes. So with then Nehemiah ben Hushiel is the one that basically is being sent ahead so that the Persians don't really lose their own people, and they say, hey, you guys can go and, be the ones that take the first blow. You said that he was a Sadducee Karaite. Would you like to actually explain more about what that actually meant for them? What were his beliefs and the beliefs of his people?
So Karaites and Sadducees have something in common that they don't. By this time, now that the Talmud has been written down, the Karaites and Sadducees have something in common. Originally, Karaites and Sadducees were not exactly the same sect. Karaites were simply Pharisees who did not believe that the oral Torah should be written down. They were opposed to the scribes. They didn't agree with the scribes. They didn't want to have the oral Torah written down. They thought it was prohibited to write the oral Torah down. And the other Pharisees who were on the side of the scribes said, yeah, the scribes should be writing down what we say. And so the scribal faction of Pharisees became the Talmudists, and they have the Talmud written down. And the non-scribal Pharisees became the Karaites, who had no written oral Torah. That's in the 1st century. But by the 7th century, we're actually in the 7th century now. By the 7th century, this is hundreds of years later. This is 600 years later. And the oral Torah, which hasn't been written down by the Karaites, is now really suffering. So they almost have no oral Torah. And so it's very difficult to distinguish Karaites from Sadducees, who are a different sect of Jews who have no oral Torah. Okay, so
one second. So the Karaites, they relied very much on oral tradition. I don't know if that actually rings a bell with any other, say, religion who actually relied very heavily on oral tradition.
Yeah, that's right. The Karaites did, and the word, in fact, the word karai it's actually related to the word for the Quran as well, and the qaris, the people who recited the Quran. So they were people of recitation. They believed to recite is better, and the Karaites were opposed to the idea of writing anything down. They didn't want to write anything down, as in oral Torah. So they had the written Torah, and that was it. They didn't write down the oral Torah. But as I said, after 600 years of this, following the destruction of Jerusalem and the conquest of the Holy Land by the Romans and the expulsion of the Jews from the Holy Land, the Karaites were suffering. Their oral tradition was really suffering. So they were not that easy to distinguish from Sadducees by this point. 600 years is an awfully long time, right? So it was not easy to distinguish them from Sadducees. So we can say that at this point in the 600s, the Sadducees who have no oral Torah, who reject the idea of oral Torah, and the Karaites who did not write down the oral Torah, even though they had some concept of oral Torah, it hadn't been written down, they were more closely aligned with each other by this time than either of them were to the Pharisees and the Talmudists who had written it down and were believing that they should write down and record the oral Torah and record their tradition. So they were an opposing faction to the scribes and the Pharisees. They were on the opposite side. Is that a good enough explanation?
Yeah. Do you think this is actually going on a tangent, but do you think that the fact that they were struggling already, the Karaites, with their oral traditions, and then someone started to write things down, maybe, perhaps because they were already Sadducees, do you think that may have influenced the myth in Islam of people were memorizing the Quran, then they cannot memorize it anymore, people are dying in battle, and then suddenly they have to write it down very quickly because otherwise they would lose more and more verses? Do you think that?
I think that this part of the standard Islamic narrative is exactly taken from this. But the point at when they start writing things down is decades later, many decades later. So at this point, it's as the standard Islamic narrative is saying about the Qaris, that they don't believe in writing it down. Everything has to be recited. It's the same as the Karaite position at this point. Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, so now where do we go next? So there was, it's what the standard Islamic narrative refers to as the first hijrah, around 617, 618, something like that. And in this year, 618, is when Khosrau basically, I forgot to say, I should have said that Nehemiah ben Hushiel's army were sent by Khosrau to conquer the Holy Land, and they succeeded. In 614, Nehemiah ben Hushiel's Sadducee Karaite army actually succeeded in conquering the Holy Land for Khosrau II, evicting the Roman authorities, and the power was taken by Persia instead. So that's an important point in 614. And then another thing to mention is the very first attempts to organize the Oriental Orthodox Church, the very first synod, if you like, where the Oriental Orthodox Christians are starting to be emerging into or starting to organize themselves in a similar way to how the Romans do, is after this conquest. It happens after this conquest in the year 616. And the Copts and the Syriacs are having a discussion in 616. Then, in 617, 618, Khosrau turns against the Jews who have just conquered Jerusalem for him. and he evicts them. He throws them out. And this is corresponding to about the time of the first hijrah in the standard Islamic narrative, where it says in the standard Islamic narrative that the early Muslims had to run away from their city, and they had to go to Abyssinia, and they went to different places in Anatolia and Abyssinia and various places. They tried to survive, and that is actually, I think, related to this event that happens when Khosrau betrays the Israelites. Khosrau is a Persian, and the Persians are sort of associated biblically with the very first Persian ruler, who is regarded as a good man. The first good Persian ruler, the first holy Persian ruler, is Cyrus the Great, Koresh, Cyrus. And I think that this word is used to refer to the Persians and has been remembered in the standard Islamic narrative as Quraysh. Okay, so Cyrus is a symbol of the Persians at this point. So the standard Islamic narrative says that Quraysh attacked the Muslims, and the Muslims had to run away to different places, and that's the first hijrah. But I think this is actually a corrupted memory of actually Persia, Quraysh, i.e. Khosrau specifically in this case, turning his back on Nehemiah ben Hushiel and his people, who have tried to establish a government on the Temple Mount. That government is called a Mamed. They tried to establish a Mamed on the Temple Mount and start to organize a Jewish government there. Khosrau is not happy about this because I think the Christians in the area complained to him, and the Jews have served their purpose. They've conquered the land for him, but now the majority of the population are Christian, and so he has to sort of appease them in some way to be able to maintain, make himself popular in their eyes, and to maintain control over the area. Otherwise, he's just going to have a revolution. He's going to spend his whole time putting down revolutions. So he, yeah.
Couple of questions about this. So we're actually now talking about the period between 614 and about 618, and say a moment later, and a moment, and then the Jews are going to be expelled from Jerusalem. Now, is that what happened at that point with Nehemiah ben Hushiel? Is he still going to be the leader in exile, or is he going to be assassinated as it almost every time happens?
Yeah, Nehemiah ben Hushiel was killed, but his Sadducee Karaite group fled to different areas, to the south and to the north to Edessa. Okay,
still on that period of time. So where he gets assassinated, and then everybody actually moves around. Mm-hmm. The government, or say the stuff that they were going to actually set up in Jerusalem, would have been something along the lines of Sadducee Judaism or Karaite. So it wouldn't be something that we would immediately recognize today as Judaism, but a very specific faction, right?
Yes, it's a very specific. They were zealots. They were militaristic. They were not pacifist. Rabbinical Judaism is pacifistic. People might find that difficult to believe because of the behavior of the state of Israel today, which claims to be Orthodox Judaic, but that's actually very anomalous. For the past 2,000 years, Rabbinical Judaism, scribes and Pharisees are pacifists, okay? But the Karaites and the Sadducees are not pacifists. They're militaristic. They are zealots. They have as I said, the Karaites have lost the oral Torah. They've very little to no oral Torah. It's basically the written Torah as it is written. That's their interpretation, what we call a sola scriptura interpretation of Judaism, taken from the scriptures alone, which is a very different religion from Pharisaical Judaism, just so you know. But nevertheless, they were the ones who were in charge.
Okay, and before we actually move on from that time stamp, is that you began by saying that the very first inscription found from the Himyarite kingdom, so that's down there in Yemen, 100 years prior. So the south of the peninsula would actually have been converted to Judaism. During these things that happened then, say 100 years later, when we are in the conquest of Jerusalem and so on, did the kingdoms of the south, do you think they have any impact? Did they send warriors to fight with the Persians, or were they at that point still like a completely different kingdom and they didn't get involved?
They were not involved.
Okay.
It was a completely different kingdom. They wouldn't even had the same religion of the Himyarite kingdom were Pharisaical, Talmudist. That means scribes and Pharisees. They had the oral tradition. That was their position down there in Himyar. They had lots of Noahides as well. Noahides are the Gerim, the people who are non-Jews, who are grafted into the Hebrew nation, and they had that in Himyar. There's a lot of conversion going on down there. So this is something that Sadducees and Karaites avoid. Karaites and Sadducees don't like to do conversions. So even today, it's very difficult to convert to Karaite Judaism. Sadducees don't believe in conversions at all. So they were a different group. But certainly, as some of these would have, as I say, the standard Islamic narrative talks about the first hijrah at this time, and it has this story about some of the Muslims running down to Abyssinia to the south, and meeting the authorities, the imperial authorities of Abyssinia, and there is this sentence where the ruler says, "The difference between me and you is as thin as this line." So, and this line may be a reference to the oral Torah, for example. So it could be that they're saying, well, we recognize you as Hebrew, we recognize you as Jews, but you don't have the oral Torah. So there is a difference. There's a line in the sand between us, but that's the only difference between us.
Okay, so we are pretty much 5 minutes before the first, the second hijrah, but the big one, the one that everybody knows about. And at that point, these groups have not actually gone anywhere south of Israel, pretty much. It's been all about Syria, Armenia, Iraq, and Israel for the most part, right?
Yes, but some of the refugees who were running away from Israel probably did go to the south. But we definitely know that some of them went to Edessa, and we have this reference from Sebios who talks about them garrisoning themselves in Edessa, having been evicted from the Holy Land by the Sassanians, who prevent their access to Jerusalem at this point. And I think this is also where we get some ideas about in the Quranic references to the Quraysh preventing the pilgrims from going to the Al-Masjid al-Haram on their pilgrimage. Then they're prevented by these. Sorry, this is a standard Islamic narrative about the idea that they were prevented from getting to Mecca by the Quraysh, and so, not the Mecca, to get to the Kaaba, the shrine, by the Quraysh. They were not letting them in, and I think that's where this idea comes from. They evicted them, and then they prevented them from coming back to Jerusalem. So at this time, we have no. It's a little bit later. It's the following year, 619, is when Emperor Heraclius decides to start his campaign to go against the Persians, and he starts marching from Byzantium across Anatolia to start making his way towards his objective is to get to Babylon and to overthrow Khosrau. That's what he's doing. But it takes a long time for him to do that. It's a 10-year campaign, but he starts his 10-year campaign at about this time, and he's looking for allies along the way. So we have a standard Islamic narrative reference that while he was making his progress into the Middle East, that a delegation sent from the father of Muawiyah. Muawiyah is a very famous king of the Arabs, and the father of Muawiyah is called Abu Sufyan, and Abu Sufyan is sent in a delegation to Heraclius, and Heraclius interviews them. He wants to know about the religion of the Arabs and he's heard about a king of the Arabs who he's interested in making an alliance with, and he gets some information from Abu Sufyan, and Abu Sufyan says when he leaves that he says the cause of Ibn Abi Kabsha has become conspicuous. Now it's usually assumed that Ibn Abi Kabsha is a reference to Muhammad, but I think it's not. I think it's actually a reference to that person I mentioned who was a successor to Nu'man III, Ibn Thabit, the first. Nu'man III was the king of the Lakhmids, the last Nasrid king. Now Nu'man III had been imprisoned by Khosrau, and Khosrau had appointed a new leader for the Arabs in that area, and the leader is called Iyas ibn Qabisa. And at the same time as Iyas ibn Qabisa was appointed by Khosrau, we have information that the Arabs themselves didn't like Iyas ibn Qabisa, and they preferred somebody called Hani ibn Qabisa. Now, they both have the same name, the same family name, Ibn Qabisa, which means they may be from the same tribe. And there may have been some tribal rivalry between them. But the local Arabs preferred Hani, and Khosrau preferred Iyas. So Ibn Abi Kabsha may be a reference to the Qabisa family. And Abu Sufyan is saying the cause of Ibn Abi Kabsha has become conspicuous, meaning even Heraclius has heard about it, is an indication that that this family was the important ruling family at that time. And later, the standard Islamic narrative interprets this hadith as being a reference to Muhammad. But I don't think it is. I think it's a reference to this family. And I think that this is a semi-historical record of Heraclius's interest in this powerful family, because he knows that there's a conflict in this family. There's a conflict between Hani ibn Qabisa and Iyas ibn Qabisa. Iyas is on the side of the Persians, and maybe Heraclius is interested in seeing whether he can get Hani onto his side in his alliance to go to war against Khosrau. That's his plan. I think that's what's going on here.
Okay, so we are then between the year, 619 is when Heraclius starts his campaign. Mm-hmm. He actually ends up reaching Jerusalem. Is in the year 629, around that time?
Yes, that's right. It takes a long time, okay. But he starts his campaign, he starts to get his allies, and in the process of getting allies, he actually, as it says in another hadith, he actually changes religion briefly.
Yeah, so while he's actually going on that campaign, he goes through his whole arc of transformation back and forth. Mm-hmm. During those 10 years, what is happening with the Sadducee Karaites that had been expelled from Jerusalem in 618 or so? What are they doing during that period?
We don't have the exact date of when it happens, but Sebios tells us that that Heraclius in his campaign going across from Byzantium across Anatolia towards Syria and Iraq and eventually to Babylon, that he comes across these Jews. It must be early on in his campaign because they're in Edessa, which is in Anatolia. He comes across these Jews in Edessa and he kicks them out. He basically says, your place is in the desert, off you go. And Sebios tells us that these Jews run away to Tajikistan, which refers to Mesopotamia or the Roman province of Orientalis. And in Tajikistan, they try to make an alliance with the Arabs they find there. They're called Ishmaelites, and they basically say, look, you're from Ishmael, and we're from Isaac. We're cousins. We should be together. Let's go and fight together to take back the Holy Land from the Romans. And the Ishmaelites refuse. And it mentions that they tried to persuade them, and they failed. So the initial leader of the Arabs at this time is, as I said, probably they're not going to go back to Khosrau. Khosrau doesn't like them, and they're not going to. They can't side with Heraclius. Heraclius has just kicked them out, so they have to be going to a group of neutral Arabs, and that's probably this Hani ibn Qabisa group of Arabs in Orientalis, who are at this point neutral. Heraclius wants to be on their side, and these Edessan Jews want to be on their side. So we can assume that there's a large number of these Arabs. They have a big kingdom, and that would be the Lakhmid kingdom, which is going all the way down the Gulf. Okay, from this point in Orientalis, going all the way down the Gulf. So both Heraclius and these Jews are trying to impress these Arabs. At first, these Jews from Edessa don't succeed in making any progress with them. So the leader at that time is Hani ibn Qabisa. But we hear that that Khosrau, sorry, not Khosrau, that Heraclius actually succeeds in making some kind. He converts, and he converts to this religion after he speaks to a representative called they call him the aseh, which means it means like a low church, a Baptist type Christian, and they call him a monophysite, a Severian, which refers to a type of monophysite or Miaphysite. belief, but they have no patriarchate, they have no bishops, they have no archbishops, they have no metropolitans, they have no patriarchs. They're called asephali, or akephali, means headless. They have no head. So he talks this headless representative headless baptized believers, and who is presenting a Miaphysite point of view, and he adopts their position for 10 years, and that is throughout the entire campaign that Heraclius wages against the Persians until he conquers Persia. He adopts this position, which he calls monoenergism, one energy. It's a way of referring to Miaphysitism before we got the acceptable term Miaphysite. There were several ways of referring to Miaphysitism before the acceptable term Miaphysite was adopted, and every earlier term for it, whether that was monophysite or monoenergist, it was or henophysite. These were abolished as heresies by the Roman Church. But briefly, Heraclius abandons diophysitism, which is the standard religion of the Roman Church. He abandons that. He becomes an apostate from that, and he adopts this Miaphysite position for 10 years throughout his entire campaign, until he conquers Persia, and then he immediately turns his back on it and rejects it. So it's very interesting at that time.
Yes. Just before we move on, that this is as well like going on a tangent, but there was a specific verse in the Quran that was actually doing my head in. There is, I think, it's Surah 9, verse 31, 32, one of those, the one that says they have taken their rabbis and monks as lords apart from Allah and the Messiah. Now, on that one, what actually got my attention is that it says the rabbis. It's like, fine, so we know who rabbis are, but then it says monks. I thought, well, if that was talking about, say, the Catholic Church, for instance, it would probably say priests, but monks is not like the highest thing. I mean, it could have been just the lingo from back then, but then in another place in the Quran, it does say the closest people to God or to understanding God, something like that, is the Nasara, because they have priests. They actually use that word, priests and monks, and they are not arrogant. So you have those two different verses in the Quran. One of them says like, well, the priests and their monks are fine, but then on the other one, it actually mentions monks like on a very different light. So I was actually wondering whether that verse from Surah 9, it referred to a particular religion that they don't have a hierarchical structure, just like you have said about a headless, say, movement, where you have preachers, but you don't have, say, a bishop, an archbishop, whatever it is. It's just, these monks. So I think it's very much on a tangent, but it really caught my attention that on that verse, it said rabbis and monks, as opposed to rabbis and priests, which probably would make more sense, at least to me.
Well, the two words which are used actually in that verse, it's Surah 9, verse 31. And the word for which is translated as rabbis is ahbarhum, their rabbis, ahbarhum. And the word which is translated as monks is it actually means and their monks, is wa ruhbanhum. Ahbarhum and ruhbanhum. So ahbar and ruhban. And ahbar and ruhban doesn't really sound like rabbi or anything like that. But what ruhban sounds a bit like monk. The word for monk in Syriac is rabban, which is the same as rabban in it means a great rabbi in Hebrew, in Judaism as well. Rabbonim are the great rabbis. So so ruhban actually sounds like monk. The ruhban, which is translated as monk, actually sounds like rabban. But as for ahbarhum, it doesn't sound like anything. There's nothing really it sounds like. But it's translated as rabbis, and that's just standard Islamic narrative. But it does refer to some kind of leaders. And this passage is criticizing the Nasara, which is usually translated as Christians, and Yahud, which is usually translated as Jews. But I think that both groups are kind of a Judaic group, and it's referring to two kind of heretical Judaic groups. Ahbarhum and Ruhbanhum refer to the two kinds of leaders. But I think the key point which you've got there is that there is a criticism of these hierarchical structures or church structures with the patriarchs and the metropolitans and the archbishops, etc. So definitely the Quran is written from the point of view of like an asephalic group who are not really interested in that kind of church hierarchy. So I think you've got a very key point there. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right. So where should we carry on from?
Well, let's see, just to almost like recap a bit. So we are around, say, the 620s, and Jerusalem is being really fought over between the Persians and the Byzantines, like for the most part. But then you have the group of Jews who had been expelled, and now they're being expelled from Edessa again. So now you have a third group that says, hey, hang on a minute. So now we are going to have either the Byzantines or the Persians in Jerusalem, but it should be us. So they try to find a way to go back and reconquer Jerusalem, and they go to the Arabs. So now we don't have just, say, the Persians and the Byzantines, but we have the Persians, the Byzantines, the Jews who want to actually go back there. And now they involve the Lahmeds, and everything is about to explode. Something like that.
Well, we can say that the 620s, which is what we're talking about right now, is a very, I think we could compare it to the modern situation, which just concluded in Syria, where it was really chaotic, and it's very difficult to understand what's going on, who's doing what, who's allied to who, and what are the alliances, and who is it worthwhile being allied to. It was a very complex situation. Certainly Heraclius wanted them on his side. Clearly these Jews wanted them on their side, and clearly Khosrau was also trying to court them as well. There are at least three groups trying to court this Lahmid kingdom. Khosrau is trying to do it through Iyas ibn Qabisa. According to the hadiths, Heraclius is interested in this Ibn Abi Kabsha, which I think is Hani ibn Qabisa, or at least the Qabisa family in general. Certainly these Jews are interested in this area too, but they're not making any progress. So
if we know that we're in the year 629, and then Heraclius is in Jerusalem. Would you mind to actually explain?
No, I don't want to jump there yet. I think what we need to do very clearly is, first of all, show that Heraclius is successful. He does conquer Persia, and he doesn't do it alone. He doesn't do it without allies. He needs allies for this. And it's very clear that the only reason he changed his religion for this time to this Miaphysitism is because he needed allies. And what happens in this time period, is we start to hear about the first conquest, and the standard Islamic narrative starts to talk about the first conquest, the first victories of the Arabs against the Persians. And the most important point, that's why I didn't want you to jump forward, is this Battle of the Kar. The Battle of the Kar is absolutely pivotal in the rise of the Arabs. The standard Islamic narrative dates this to the year 622, and I see no reason to doubt that this took place in 622. I think that is totally acceptable. I think that there may be a confusion between the Battle of the Kar with other Islamic battles, but certainly the Battle of the Kar is absolutely pivotal. Tabari tells us, interestingly, that the victory of the Battle of the Kar is due to Muhammad, and then like 2 pages later, Tabari tells us that the victory of Battle of the Kar is due to somebody called Hanzala, which I don't think is an accident on his part. I think he's trying to slip something through underneath the censor's nose. He's trying to be a bit of a historian here, trying to slip something through to us so we can make sense of it. And in this Battle of the Kar, Hani ibn Qabisa's faction defeat Iyas ibn Qabisa's faction and the Persians. They defeat them in the Kar, and they take hold of a significant portion of Mesopotamia. That's really important. And that is absolutely good news. It's really positive news for Heraclius. Heraclius must be absolutely delighted by this, because it means Persia is falling, and there are people who are attacking Persia just like he is, and he's definitely going to be very happy about that. So I think it's very possible that Heraclius is of the same religion as Hani ibn Qabisa's people, who are attacking the Persians at the Kar at this point. I think that's very, very positive, a very realistic way of interpreting these passages and seeing this. So there's an alliance. Maybe it's an informal alliance, but there's a religious alliance or an ideological alliance between Heraclius and these people, and they're overthrowing the Persians. But the Jews at this point are not succeeding. They may have joined in the battle to try and ingratiate themselves with these Arabs against the Persians. Certainly, they would have a vendetta against Khosrau for turning against them. So they may have joined in, but they are not leaders at this point in the Kar. And we hear in the hadiths that there is actually a point in which these Jews are persecuted by these Arabs. So anyway, that's a very important thing which we mustn't gloss over. The Kar. Okay, now we've got the Kar. We can move on to 629, which you wanted me to talk about. At this point, Heraclius abandons his treaty, abandons his religion with these people. He returns to being basically a diophysite. He adopts something called monothelitism, which is a Nestorianism. And now Nestorianism is a diophysite position. So that means he's coming back towards the orthodoxy of the diophysite Roman Church, even though Nestorians are still like a bit far out there. He is coming back towards the diophysite position. He's definitely no longer in alliance with these monophysite messianic believers. He's no longer in alliance with them. And at this point, of course, they would feel betrayed by him. They would feel like he has turned his back on them. And we also hear that Heraclius starts persecuting the monophysite Christians at this point in alliance with the Nestorians and the Parthians. So there is a big sort of backlash from Heraclius, and then he goes and he takes Jerusalem. He takes control of Jerusalem. So that is what happens in 629.
Okay, there's I don't want to actually skip ahead because we're going almost like year by year to see what happens, but actually almost like jumping to within 10 years now, Jerusalem is going to fall under the command of Umar, which we had discussed before, that he was basically a Sadducee, which then he actually converts to a Messianic movement. But at this point, he is going to be somewhere, probably in Iraq or something like that, and he's going to start his move. But the move that is going to begin now to push against Heraclius is going to be, say, spearheaded by Sadducees, nothing to do with monophysites? Or do you think that the movement that goes against Heraclius is because of him changing his belief? What is the...
Okay.
Or they just don't care, they just want to get Jerusalem, and everybody has their own belief as to why they want Jerusalem?
Well, certainly they simply want control of Jerusalem. This is what they've wanted from the time of Nehemiah. They were kicked out. They tried to persuade the Arabs, but you've got to explain how they get back on top. They are nowhere near in control of the situation. How do they come on top? How do they come into control of the situation that they could do that? They could take Jerusalem. And so you can't skip ahead without explaining that. You've got to go through the end of the 620s, 630s, 632s. You've got to go through the 630s. So in the 630s, the early 630s, as again, Sebios is very helpful here. He says that these Jews were trying to persuade these Arabs, and they failed to do so until a new leader arose amongst them. And this new leader managed to unite these Jews from Edessa, these Karaites, these Sadducees, and the Arabs, and they went together and they conquered the Holy Land. They conquered Jerusalem. Now we hear the first story we hear about this migration. This is with Thomas the Presbyter, who talks about the Tayaya de Mahmed. He uses a T, by the way, de Mahmet. Tayaya de Mahmet is mentioned in 634. In 634. Now, the standard Islamic narrative says that Muhammad's already dead by this time. So the new leader who rises up amongst them, that Sebios talks about, who manages to unite the Jews and the Arabs together, is at the wrong time to be Muhammad, according to the standard Islamic narrative. Could be the Mahmed mentioned by Thomas the Presbyter, but Thomas the Presbyter, although he mentions this happening in 634, he's not writing it until much later, in the 640s. So I think he's writing about their religion. He's describing their religion and not the leader. And I think most Muslims also go along with that and say, yeah, he's describing these are the people of Muhammad, and they are taking control of Jerusalem, and he's not talking about their leader called Muhammad. And there's there are good reasons why we should understand that this is a reference to their religion rather than to them, because or their leader, because other places are referring to their leader, including Sebios, as Amr or Emir simply, or Umair or Omar, and in one place in the standard Islamic narrative they call him Khaled as well. So we've got, and Khaled, by the way, means immortal, and it is a translation of the Greek word ambros. So you have this word Ambros, which is again this Amr. We also hear the word Ambros is used to refer to him when he conquers Gaza. So we've got one place calling him Amro, another calling him Amr, another calling him Umair, another calling him Emir, another calling him Omar, another calling him Ambros, and then we have a translation of Ambros into Arabic as Khalid. So Khalid is the odd one out, but it is a translation of a Greek word Ambros, which is assuming this Amr is actually Ambros. So
okay,
we've got,
so are you saying that this legendary leader who manages to actually bring everyone on the same page and then go to Jerusalem at around 634 happens to be the one that has been recorded in the standard Islamic narrative as Umar?
Yes, I think so. Well, the standard Islamic narrative actually records all of these names. They have Omar, they have Amr, they have Umayyah, they have Khalid, they have all of these people, and they haven't. There's no historical attempt to kind of look. They're in the same place. They're doing the same thing. They must be the same person. It's just different sources and different languages have referred them in different spellings. The standard Islamic narrative just says all these are different people, and that's the standard Islamic narrative. But
and you are saying all of those people are the same one, and it is Umar, and he is a Sadasi or Sadasi Karite.
Yes.
What is he?
Well, he's one of the two. I wouldn't put my finger on it to be too precise, but I think the standard Islamic narrative has this record of his name and says they call him Omar ibn al-Khattab. And I think Ibn al-Khattab is a corruption of Ibn al-Kitab. Okay? And Ibn al-Kitab is a Judeo-Arabic way of referring to what we call the sons of scripture, also called in Hebrew Bnei Mikra. Al-Kitab means the scripture. So I think this Bnei Mikra is what we would call him in Hebrew, and the Ibn al-Kitab is describing his religion. He, in this case, would be a Karite, okay, as opposed to a Sadducee. Now, immediately prior to him was this Sadducee Abu Bakr as-Sadiq. As-Sadiq means a gentleman in Arabic, but in Judeo-Arabic means Sadiq is Sadok, is Sadducee. So he was preceded by a Sadducee who failed to unite the Arabs under the Jewish agenda. And he then, and I think that's what Sebios means when he says that they tried, but they failed. I think it's like a one-line reference to Abu Bakr. They tried, but they failed is like Abu Bakr's failure. He was there for a couple of years. All that he experienced was rebellion. He spent his entire rule trying to put down rebellions. He failed. But then after this failure came this new leader who succeeded in uniting the two. And he wasn't a Sadducee, he was a Karite. Karites are slightly more flexible than...
Okay, one second. So the stories of Abu Bakr then they get recorded in the Islamic history as the apostasy wars, as the Ridda Wars, because of all of the fighting that he had to do. But so far, we are nowhere near Yemen or Oman or the Hijaz. We are up there in the north, right?
That's right. And what happens is, according to standard Islamic narrative, there are problems taking place in Iraq. And it says that the Muslims in Iraq were having trouble, so they invited... they sent a letter to ask for help to the south, and the south sent reinforcements to Iraq, and they managed to conquer Iraq. And now we start to see a correlation between the standard Islamic narrative and history. Iraq suddenly becomes the important place in the 630s. So a standard Islamic narrative says that nothing was happening in Iraq, everything was happening in Hijaz, in Mecca until this time, and there is no corroboration of any of that happening down in Mecca at this time. But if we move it all further north, then the story that I've been telling so far shows that there's quite a lot of corroboration, but it's also a very different story. Mecca in Hijaz has no meaning, no relevance at this point at all. But then suddenly in the 630s, we start to see even more corroboration in the standard Islamic narrative with events happening in Iraq. And we hear also, just before then, we hear about the first raids in the 629, for example, the first raids of it's called the Battle of Mu'tah, which mentions sort of skirmishes in Jordan in 629, in September 629, and again in Al-Karak in 630, as Heraclius made his way to recapture the Holy Land. So it seems like the Arabs are maybe in alliance with Heraclius as he goes to capture the Holy Land, or they are fighting against Heraclius as he's coming to make his capture of the Holy Lands. And we hear these little skirmishes in 629, 630. But then in 634, and it could be these skirmishes also maybe reference to the Ridda wars, these what's it called? Rebellions against Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr is not successful. But then finally in 634, this new leader has come and he's united them. Now, the Standard Islamic narrative indicates that this new leader came from the south. And there are Coptic records that mention this new leader came from the south. And we have a kind of corroboration that somehow this Omar leader may have, or this emir, came from the south. So although most of the Sadducees had blocked themselves up in Edessa and were kicked out by Heraclius and then tried to make an alliance with the Arabs under the rule of their Sadducee ruler, who is Abu Bakr as-Sadiq, the Sadducee. He's not an Arab. He's an Arabic-speaking Jew, a Judeo-Arabic-speaking Jew, Sadducee. He is unpopular. Sadducees are very hard. They're very hard line. They're not so flexible. They're not so gentle. They're not so open-minded, and they're not so ready to deal with foreigners. Okay, he is unpopular. But once they apply for support from the south, along comes this new leader who is popular. He is a Karaite, I think, because of his name. Ibn al-Khattab, I think, is a corruption of Ibn al-Khattab. So he's a Karaite. He's slightly more flexible and able to deal politically and establish an alliance with the Ishmaelites. And then together they go and start conquering the Holy Land. Yeah.
Okay, yes, when you're saying from the south, you mean the region of the south, Yemen, Oman, as opposed to the south of the Lakhmed Empire.
No, I mean from Yemen, exactly, from the Yemen.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the term which is used. Now, I think he could have been related to one of the Sadducee Karaites who were in Nehemiah ben Hushiel's army, who were scattered in the first Hijrah. And his family went south, while the rest, like the Abu Bakr family, went north to Edessa. He could have been from that family, but having been there for what is it now? It's the 630s. He arrives in 640 with the army, so he's around you can say he comes around 633, and managed to unite people. So it's almost 20 years. It's maybe 15 years at least since his family moved to the south. And I think he has more experience with Noahides. He has more experience with Pharisees. He has more experience with Christians. So he's more politically savvy than the Edessan Sadducees, who simply garrisoned themselves in Edessa and shut the door to everybody. In Himyar, I think that the group which were in Himyar, that went to the south, where Himyar used to be, learned a more flexible way, learned a more cooperative way, learned some techniques which were the Pharisees had used, and to make alliance with these Noahides. And they thought, you know what, we could learn something from the Himyarite kingdom. And I think it's also in Himyar where he came across these references to Muhammad as the messenger of God, as an important unifying figure for these Noahides of Yemen. Remember that this word Muhammad was mentioned in 523, more than 100 years ago. It's 110 years ago that this Muhammad first appeared in the inscriptions. And here we have in 633. I know that Muslims listening would be confused and say, no, Muhammad came in 620, not 100 years ago. No, go and listen to the beginning of the show again, because they need to know that Muhammad is a Judeo-Arabic term for the messenger of God, long time before Islam has any kind of even a twinkle in the eye. Long time before that. So I think that he's absorbed these ideas in Himyar, and he's using this angelic Messiah figure as a unifying force to unite all the Arabs and everybody together with the Jews. Look, basically saying, if we go and we conquer Jerusalem and we establish the sacrifices on the Temple Mount, Muhammad is going to come down from heaven and he's going to rule us as the kingdom of God. And all we have to do is do that. So that's what the Tayyid Muhammad are. They are, it is a reference to their religion. It's not a reference to their leader. It's a reference to their religion. But that Muhammad is not the Muhammad of Islam as we know him. It's the Muhammad of the Himyarite kingdom. That's the Tayyid Muhammad. So he's brought this Muhammad kind of concept with them. They go and they conquer the Holy Land.
Okay.
And it's successful, and they conquer in it's a 2-year battle, and in 636 they managed to conquer the Jerusalem, and Sophronius hands over the keys of Jerusalem to Omar.
Okay, so before we actually get to that, I'm just going on a tangent again, because Umar actually manages to do something just about impossible. Jerusalem is a very heavily fortified city. It is actually has been used to being under siege many times. So Umar is not just a military leader that just grows on a tree one day. So he must have been up to something. He's already 40. In order to be able to accomplish that, he is a military leader. He's a diplomat. He's probably many, many things. What do you think, or what would you expect him to have been doing up to that point when he just goes north with his armies as a very experienced leader? I don't think that he was, just wasting time until one day he decides to go and conquer Jerusalem. Do you have any idea as to what he was doing down there to gain his experience in all of this that makes him then being able to conquer Jerusalem later?
I think we should just follow the standard Islamic narrative on this with regards to those Muslims who fled during the first Hijrah to Abyssinia, and then later left the south and went back north to fight with the Muslims to conquer and establish the Arabic Empire, establish the Caliphate. They were not doing much.
But do you think that then Umar could have been one of those, like say, that were expelled from the north? He was not originally from Yemen, but he was from the north, went to Yemen. He did a few things there.
Yes.
He was already an experienced warrior, and then he managed to get his forces probably for a decade or so.
I think, as I said, it's 15 years. So he was probably was one of the members of the army of Nehemiah ben Hushiel that was expelled. Spent 15 years in Yemen learning about this Himyarite religion. I don't think he caused any trouble down there. If there is, we don't have any records in any Byzantine or Persian or Syriac or Armenian sources or Coptic sources. And in fact, if you want to find out more about what might have been going on down there, then you're going to have to look at the Tigrinya sources. You're going to have to look at the sources in Tigrinya, which I don't read, I don't study, and I don't know about. But as far as I know, it's very quiet. All he's doing basically down there is he and his family are seeking refuge. They're trying to live a quiet life until they hear that there is actually a requirement for more warriors to come from there. And he thinks, yeah, I can do this. I know how to solve this situation. So he takes his garrison with him, his army with him, and he goes north. I would say he's the leader of those Karaites who were exiled from or expelled from Jerusalem in 618. He's the leader of those who went south.
So then that would also fit that he was one of the warriors who actually went there in 614. Basically, he had already been in Jerusalem. He's a very experienced warrior. He is actually going up the ranks. And after the exile and then moving to the south, he keeps basically moving his these chessboard pieces to gain power. At one point, he knows he's going to return to Jerusalem.
Yes, I think so. I don't think that he was part of the ruling elite of Jerusalem. When he was in Jerusalem in 618, when he was expelled from Jerusalem, I think he was just a soldier at that time, and he wasn't part of the ruling elite. He wasn't part of the Mamed, which was established by Nehemiah ben Hushiel. I think probably Abu Bakr Sadiq was part of the Mamed, and he was part of the ruling elite, but this man wasn't. And I say that because he has a Jewish advisor with him, according to standard Islamic narrative. When he goes into Jerusalem and conquers Jerusalem, his Jewish advisor, tells him where they were going to try and build the temple at the time of Nehemiah ben Hushiel. So this is a part of the standard Islamic narrative that he did intend to continue the work of Nehemiah ben Hushiel. And he consults one of the elite who is with him. and he tells him exactly where they were going to build the temple, and he sets up a shrine there. He sets up a shrine according to the biblical description in the Torah, a tent, and they start lighting the Hanukkah menorah there, and we have some various records about that. So he does that when he goes in. So I don't think he was part of the elite when he was there, when he was kicked out in 618. I think he was just a young soldier. He was kicked out. He got a lot of experience in Himyar. He became the leader of those Karaites who had fled to Himyar. And when he heard that they sent for reinforcements to the south, he was ready to go and take control. And he took control of the situation and succeeded. He first went to help Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr was killed by the time he arrived, and he manages to take control of the situation and unite the factions and establish peace and unite them to go and conquer the Holy Land. That's what I think, yes.
Yeah, and once actually he gets there, he wants to basically create his or build what Nehemiah ben Hushel didn't do, and really create that empire. And his beliefs are either Karaite or Sadducee, something between the two, before the next movement in his arc, when he basically converts, which I think we, you mentioned before, and it's great that we're getting there. But when he gets there, he is Sadducee Karaite when he actually enters the city.
I would say no. When he left the city in 618, he was a Sadducee Karaite. Having spent time in Yemen, he's more open-minded to rabbinical ideas now, and maybe more open-minded to Christian ideas, at least the Miaphysite Noahides, not the Roman Christians, who he obviously hates. And there's a story when his army goes in to conquer Jerusalem, they fight against these Miaphysite Noahides. I think it's called the 40 Martyrs of Gaza, I think it's called, and it's about Ambrose as he goes in and he beheads of all the Christians who refuse to convert to his way or accept his rule in Gaza. So he's not a friend and he's not a fan of the Diophysite Byzantine Roman Christians. He wants to kill them, but I think he's okay with the Miaphysites, who he's using the term Muhammad to refer to the Miaphysite Messiah, the return of the Messiah. He's being political and maybe a bit of a demagogue in that he has found a way to unite Pharisee Noahides with Miaphysites, with Sadducees, with Karaites. So he's much more savvy when he comes back to Jerusalem than he was when he left Jerusalem.
Right, and at this point, it's probably worth mentioning that there is nothing even remotely similar to Islam. The word hasn't been introduced. The book hasn't been compiled. Nothing at all. So we are just talking about, fighters conquering a very important city.
What I think exists at this point from Islam is only the word Muhammad as a messenger of God, but there is no concept of Muhammad as a human prophet born and grew up in Mecca. That doesn't exist. At this point, Muhammad, the only Muhammad there is the same Muhammad there was 100 years beforehand, an angel who is supposed to come down from heaven once they conquer Jerusalem and rule, and he's supposed to take up residence in the temple and this basically rule the God's kingdom on earth as God's representative in the temple with them, as a Messiah. That's what they believe in at this point. I think that I should say about Hanzala, we mentioned Hanzala earlier, who is the one who was responsible for winning the Battle of Dhikar. He was a poet, a very popular poet. And I think that Hanzala had a lot of narratives which were popular with his people, with Hani ibn Qabisa's faction. So I do think that they existed, that these poems existed at this time, but they haven't been compiled into a mushaf of the Quran or anything like that. It doesn't exist at this point. I think that will be done by Omar once he becomes more interested in the religion of these of Hanzala and Hani ibn Qabisa, these Messianic Noahides, which he's not very interested at this point. At this point, he's trying to lead them to Jerusalem, and he's trying to convince them that the angel of the Lord is going to come down from heaven, take up residence in the Holy of Holies as the King Messiah, and they're all going to see this as soon as they get to Jerusalem and build and restore the shrine on the Temple Mount.
Okay, are you saying that it's probable that Hanzala would have actually written some of the stuff that is now in the Quran, but if that were the case, it would be the verses that have, for example, to do with Moses or things like that, as opposed to the things to do with Jesus that would come much later?
No, I think that the Jesus things would be there because Hanzalah was a Messianic, definitely, as was Hani ibn Qabisa. They were both Messianic. They were the same religion that Khosrau became. Remember the Miaphysite religion that Khosrau adopted temporarily for 10 years when he was making his campaign. So I think that there's plenty of possibility of passages which sound very Christian, because some of the passages in the Quran are very Christian. And those would be from this Hanzalah Hani faction which were living in, which won the Battle of the Kar. Yeah, but this hasn't been. I don't even think that these were written down at this point. I think that they're just popular poems in the minds of the people because they were not a literary society. They were an oral society at that point.
Right. Just to point this out as well, or to throw a curveball, is that the stories, particularly about Jesus in the Quran, they happen to be the, say, pseudo-gospels and so on, like probably from the area of Syria that they would have been around.
Yeah,
so do you think that they had...
Yeah, all of these texts are Miaphysite. What they call the Gnostic Gospels are Gnostic because only because the Roman Christians call them Gnostic as an attack against the Monophysites. But from the Monophysite point of view, these are standard Gospels. This is legitimate truth. There's nothing wrong with these. These are not Gnostic in any way at all. It's just that
so they would have been actually taken from those, as opposed to, say, the Catholic canon.
So Infancy Gospel of Thomas, for example, is in there. The comments on the, and not only that, but there are references to. There's plenty of Talmudic references in there, so we definitely know that these were some kind of Messianic Noahides, and they were Miaphysite in their belief concerning Jesus of Nazareth. They were not Diophysite because the gospel narratives we see in the Quran are from this Miaphysite tradition, not from the Diophysite tradition. Yes.
Okay, so then the difference between, say, or the beef that Umar has is not because, say, it's he's a Jew and he's fighting against Christians, but because he's in a Messianic, say, movement, and he disagrees as to what the Messiah is for those Christians, for example, in Gaza and so on. So they all believe in Messiah being very, very different, and Umar basically takes no prisoners.
Yes, well, the Karaites have their own story about Jesus, and Jesus, from the Karaite point of view, is the son of Mary Magdalene, and he was opposed to rabbinical Judaism, and he was just a human being who led a rebellion. So it's a very different story. The Karaites have no knowledge of Jesus of Nazareth, the teacher of Mary Magdalene. They have no knowledge of that. The Karaites only have knowledge of Jesus, the son of Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene had a son and named her son after her teacher. The Karaites have no knowledge of her teacher. They only have knowledge of her son. So he would have thought that the Christians were worshipping the son of Mary Magdalene, who is very clearly a human in Karaite tradition, and he would have considered the Christians of Gaza to have been just idolaters, just pagan idolaters. Whereas the Messiah for Messianic Noahides is the same angel who appeared to Moses, who appeared to the prophets after Moses, Isaiah, to Ezekiel, to Elijah. This is the same angelic being that appears as a burning bush. This is the Messiah for Messianic Noahides. They recognize Jesus of Nazareth, the teacher of Mary Magdalene, as nothing but an appearance, yet another appearance of the same Jewish Messiah, and that is acceptable position. And Omar would have been thinking, okay, well, that's Muhammad. That's the same Muhammad of Himyar. But he would have thought that the Christians were worshipping the son of Magdalena, and he wouldn't have seen the two Jesuses as anything related at all. They would have been very different things. The Messianic Noahides maybe just calling him by Jewish names, like Messiah, for example. They could have called they could have referred to him as the Tzemach. They could have referred to him as Shiloh. They could have many different ways of referring to as Adon. There are many different ways of referring to the Messiah. And even in the book of in the Song of Solomon, in the Song of Songs, in I think it's is it chapter 5 verse 16, they refer to him as Mahamadim. So Mahamadim is a Hebrew way of referring to him, and so they would have used all these words of referring to him. Yeshia as another way of referring to him. I think that they could use the word Isa to refer to him as well. This is a Persian name. And it should be noted that according to rabbinical Judaism, the name Yeshua itself is a sacred name and should not be pronounced. It's sacred. So they wouldn't have been necessarily calling him Yeshua. So they wouldn't have, from Omar's point of view, he's got a group of kind of semi-Jewish sort of converts here who all are following the Jewish Messiah, and they have this story about him from these Gnostic Gospels, so-called Gnostic Gospels, or Miaphysite Gospels. And then he comes into contact with these Roman Christians who he's already experienced before, who are Diophysites and have their own Gospels. And he, as far as he's concerned, these are two very different things. He doesn't see a relationship between the two. The infancy Gospel of Jesus has him talking as a child. The Christians in the Roman tradition, they don't have that. There are Christmas carols. For example, the cherry tree carol, even in English language, which talks about Jesus talking as a child and talks about his mother getting the fruit from the tree when he's born, which is in the Quran. These are passages in the Quran, but these are folk tales which preserved amongst Miaphysite Christians in Europe, who always existed in Europe, but they were always persecuted in Europe. They were never part of the standard mainstream. That's why, the cherry carol is not very well known amongst Christmas carols. There are many other Christmas carols which are much more popular than the cherry tree carol, which begins, "Joseph was an old man, and a very old man was he." This is how it goes. It tells the story of how, when after giving birth to Jesus, Mary was hungry and she wants some fruit from the tree, and the baby Jesus speaks, and the tree bends down, and she takes the cherries from the tree. This is in the Quran, but this is a Christmas carol, which you don't hear much about it because it's a folk carol, as opposed to the standard Diophysite Christian doctrine where Jesus isn't speaking as a child. See, so these things are not completely unheard of in European Christian tradition, but they are very strong part of the Miaphysite Oriental Christian tradition or Messianic tradition. Okay.
So Umar doesn't really see much difference between different factions. He sees lots of them being very compatible and some that are very incompatible. But then he has some sort of change of hearts and jumps boats.
Yeah. So, he's conquered Jerusalem in 636, and he's promised everybody, according to the strong Karaite and Sadducee belief, that the Messiah is going to come down from heaven once they establish this temple sacrifices, and he's going to take up residence in the Holy of Holies. Well, along comes 646, and nothing has happened yet. So he's starting to, you just think about it. You've got no television to distract you. You've got no theater. You've got no movies to distract you. You haven't got books to distract you. You're a population who've just conquered the Holy Land. And just waiting a week is a long time. You're spending all of your focus these days is on religious scriptures, because that's the time we're talking about. At that time, the only focus is really religious scriptures. You're reading religious scriptures every day, every week. You've got sermons about it. Months are passing by, and people are feeling, okay, well, we've got to start building. First of all, we have to put the shrine in place. A year has passed. That's a long time, but it's only the first year. A second year has passed. That's a long time. A third year has passed. That's a very long time. A fourth year has passed. That's a very, very long time. A fifth year, a sixth year, a seventh year, an eighth year. The Messiah hasn't come yet. He's losing face. This is a serious issue for him. And what we hear is that he has a debate it's actually in a manuscript which was preserved from 874. The manuscript we have is 874, but it tells a story of something much, much earlier. A disputation between somebody called a patriarch called John and the emir. It doesn't say who he is. It just calls him the emir in Jerusalem. Okay. It's recorded that on the 9th of May in 644, this emir he invited the Syriac Orthodox leader. Now it's called Syriac Orthodox Church, but at that time there was no Syriac Orthodox Church, but he was the leader, a representative of the Syriac Christians, Messianics, who is John III of Cedar. Cedar is where we got Sidro, the Sidur. John the First of the Sidur. A Siddur is a phrase for Jewish prayer book. So John III of the Sidur, that's his name, Sidro in Syriac. He's invited by the emir to explain what is it that these Christians around us are believing, these Byzantines, these Romans around us. And John explains the religion, and the emir is very, very confused because he says, well, that's nothing like the story of Jesus as I know it. And they have a bit of a disputation, a bit of an argument. And then in the end, the emir requests that John organize the translation of the Christian Gospels, of the 4 Gospels, the New Testament, into Arabic for him. He orders the translation from Syriac into Arabic so he can understand exactly what they are talking about.
Okay, and we're talking about the Gospels.
Yeah, the New Testament as we know it.
Yeah. Okay. But and also you said the date. Actually, you said 644. This is in 644, and also that then something up in 646. According to the standard Islamic narrative,
I think he converts by 646. But the very important thing that happens before his conversion is this disputation on the 9th of May in 644.
Okay, but you still think that it is Umar. And the standard Islamic narrative, the date about his death is wrong. I think it's 642,
yeah,
I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think this is Umar, the same one who is come in and taken control of the place.
Right, and probably because you haven't actually found any documents that says that the guy who actually entered Jerusalem was already dead, and it seems to be like his death happens later, and it matches the account from the standard Islamic narrative, except for the dates, right? So you don't have...
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
In the standard Islamic narrative, we have a radical conversion of Omar when he realizes that his sister, who he killed for following the gospel, for following the Quran, or Karyana, which is actually that phrase as well, which is a Syriac prayer book, which is popular. By the way, you can buy that Karyana today. It's called the the Palestinian Syriac Lectionary. You can buy it on Amazon. It's not expensive. And he kills his sister for following this, and then he realizes what it says, because I think he couldn't read it first, but eventually he starts to learn to read it. Once he understands it, he realizes that he killed his sister for nothing, and he's heartbroken, and he converts to Islam. That's the standard Islamic narrative. And I think something like that happens. The emir is totally confused by this story of Jesus. As far as he knows, it's completely different from the story which is being told to him from the New Testament. So he orders the translation of the Christian materials into Arabic, and the Banu Uqayl and the Tanuch and the Tayaya translate it for him. And it is alleged that the emir initially demanded that mentions of the name of Christ and baptism and the cross should be removed from the translation, but he relented following John's refusal to alter any of the details. He wanted to translate it honestly, exactly as it said. And so he said, okay, fine, translate it exactly as it said, even though it seems to him to be blasphemous. He let it and translated as it was. And this was very, very important point, pivotal point. When the translation came, he changed his attitude completely towards Christians. We have an indication that when this is very interesting, when John's messenger, the church's messenger, brings the translation to him, the messenger is called Gabriel. And when the messenger, Gabriel of Cartman, brings the translation of the Karyana to him, of the Quran to him, that he greets him with great respect and honor, and appears to be converted by him. That's very interesting.
Appears, saying, so he reads actually a translation of the gospel into Arabic, but that would make him then a Christian in the, say, Catholic sense, for need of a
Not
better
necessarily,
word.
because he's been telling all of his people that Muhammad is going to come down from heaven and rule them. And so all that I think happens is at this point the coins come about. You know about his coins, the Muhammad coins have a picture of Jesus on them, holding the cross, with a cross on his head. It's very clearly this is Jesus. Now, people say, well, how do you know it's not just another saint holding the cross? Because saints hold the instrument of their torture with them. For example, if it was Saint Peter who was being depicted, he would hold a cross, but the cross would be upside down because he was crucified upside down. If it was, say, Saint James who was on the coin, it would be holding a sword because Saint James was killed by the sword. But this one is holding a cross, and there is a cross on his head, or a cross above him on a mountain behind him. Maybe it's difficult to tell. So this is definitely Jesus who is holding the cross on this coin, but the name underneath is written Muhammad.
Okay, so the belief from the Muhammad of the 520s as the Spirit of God has now changed to the persona of Jesus as the Messiah.
Yeah. So what he promised his people that Muhammad would come, and it seems like what he decides is like to say to his people, yes, Muhammad did come. It turned out it was Jesus all along, and so they So he doesn't lose face. He doesn't lose face. Very political, but I think there's sincerity in it as well.
He doesn't lose face, he just loses his life very shortly after, right? But he's now converted, say, for need of a better word, he's now a Christian from
a Messianic Noahide at the very least. Yeah, and you will say, well, how can a Jew become a Noahide? And the answer is because Karaites are regarded as apostates, and apostates in Judaism must come to Noahide Judaism. Originally, that's what the teaching is. They have to come to Noahide Judaism rather than to Orthodox Judaism, because the idea is they can never be members of the Kehillah, which is the central body of religious Orthodox Jews ever again. Really, they can only really be Noahides. So he would have adopted Noahide Judaism. Yeah.
And then actually once he converts, even though we're thinking about everything that happened from a religious point of view, but in the end, most of the things going on in the ground is people trying to find ways of gaining power and stuff. So once he has actually done this U-turn, this is going to open up for all of his enemies to actually take advantage of that in order to gain power. Yeah. And that's perhaps when the whole Ali thing begins.
Well, I think what happens first is he wants to get now standard Islamic narrative says that Omar was the first person to start collecting the Quran, and he commissioned Zayd ibn Thabit to do that. But at this point, he wanted to get a mushaf of these of these verses from Ali, and Ali's wife Fatima refused, and he kicked the door down on her, causing her to have a miscarriage, and eventually she died in the future because of that miscarriage. But she refused to hand the manuscript over to him, so he instead commissioned Zayd ibn Thabit to go around and collect narrations anywhere he could find it from anybody who could. But that he died before he did anything with this. This was just left in the possession of his daughter, who didn't do anything with it until the following Caliph, Uthman, asked her for it, and he completed the collection of these narrations with reference to Ali's Mus'haf, and that became the Quran as we know it. But apparently the collection began with Omar.
Okay, but if he had actually commissioned the Gospels to be translated into Arabic, and now he's reading that, why isn't he just having those Gospels just sent everywhere and saying, okay, so now we are Christians and that's that? Why is he going around to create something else?
No, well, I think he was. You're missing that there is no entertainment for anybody in those days. There's no TV, there's no radio, there's no theater that you go to with performances.
Are you sure? Netflix? I think Netflix was around in the 630s, wasn't it?
The only thing you have is basically religious stories and folk tales and some street performers. You have street performers who are performing popular narrations for people to as their intended entertainment. That's it. So as a leader of a state, the morale of your troops and the education of your society to make sure everybody is on the same page is very important to you. And the main vehicle for that propaganda was street performances. And I think he was collecting Hanzala's poetry for this purpose. He was going to basically filter out and sift through and decide what was good to, because he was already popular, what was good to promote and what was not good to promote. So I think that was actually part of the general operation of the society at that time. It's very important to make sure that you've got your population on the same page.
Okay, so you think basically they were not, because at the moment the Quran and say the Gospels, they contradict each other. So when he got the Gospels and then he tried to get street performances, say for people to go out there and spread it, it would be quite different to what we have today. It will probably be a lot larger. It would have a lot more compatibility with the Gospels. But of course, canonizations and things happened later. But when during that time is when Uthman is supposed to be putting together the Quran. This is what Umar is trying to actually do, but it is not the Quran that we have today. Is much of what we have today, but a lot more Christian than it currently is.
Well, I think we actually do have the exact materials that Omar collected. I think it's the codex which comes from the Amr Masjid in Fustat. I think that is actually the materials that Omar collected there. I think we have it. Today with us, and it's not the complete Quran, and it is. I've done videos on my channel where I've gone through lines of it and explained the difference between it and the modern day Quran. So I've had a picture on the screen and I've gone through it, and you see that there are spelling differences, there are word differences, minor differences, but it's basically the same Quran.
Okay.
Basically. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Actually, taking one step back from the Quran, is it now fair? Is it fair to assume that, seeing as Umar was then from the south and he got his armies to the north and then they conquered Jerusalem, that actually works as well to unify the whole lands all the way from the south to Jerusalem as a huge empire, which before was just everybody was very divided? Is it at that point when Yemen becomes part of this pre-caliphate sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a pre-caliphate. There is no one unifying religion for the whole thing right now. The verses which is collected, which Hanzala did, are not being collected for any religious purpose. It's just the entertainment of the time and the relationship. So you try and force a religion on everybody, they're going to be upset about it. But if you just give them entertainment, they're not going to be upset about it. There are plenty of people out there who, even today, like to watch Jesus movies or TV shows without even regarding themselves as Christian, but they enjoy the entertainment of the Jesus movie or Jesus TV show. For example, Son of God was a very popular TV show with plenty of people who were not Christian. The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's story, is very popular, even with people who aren't Christian, because it's just good entertainment. And I think that's what we have to. And by the way, there are significant differences between these. The very popular one is The Chosen going on right now, and it's significantly different. The Chosen is completely heretical from a point of view of Orthodox Christianity. If you want to, but if you ask most people, young people these days, if they know what's written in the Gospel, or if they know anything about the Chosen TV series, they've probably seen an episode of the Chosen TV series, and they probably haven't got any knowledge of what's written in the Gospels, right? So their knowledge of Jesus is based on what's his name? It's I can't remember his name. Dallas, the guy who Dallas Jenkins is based on the vision of Jesus in the mind of Dallas Jenkins, as Dallas Jenkins has presented him in his TV show, which is completely heretical. Got nothing to do. It's just like vaguely similar to the New Testament, vaguely similar, but really the dialogue, the script, the story between him and Mary Magdalene, it's all made up by Dallas Jenkins and his team, so, but it's good entertainment. And that's how it was, I think, at that time. This is basically religious-based entertainment to unite people in a very informal way. Later, it was codified into the Quran. But at that time, it wasn't. It was just entertainment. Have I gone off point?
No, this is actually on point. So when we actually think about Umar, and actually this is something that I have experienced many times, we're actually thinking about everything that happened, and it's all religion. But these are people that they are there, they have their political agendas, they have to conquer land, they have their own ambitions. So if we actually think about Umar, and then we remove the religious element, he is, for need of a better word, a king. And seeing as he has now accomplished so much under his leadership, is he now having the kingdoms of the south being in partnership with him, or
well, the
part
kingdom
of
of
almost
failed a long time ago. Himyarite kingdom was already finished by the time he arrived there. But despite it falling, people are still operating peacefully with each other, and he sees something beneficial in this, and he learned something when he was down there. Even though the Himyarite kingdom was over by the time he got down there, he still learns from the people of that area a lot. So,
yeah. But then, because he actually comes out from there, he has his friends probably in the politics and in all of the different spheres, and now he has gone all the way to the north and then all the way into Jerusalem. So at that point, is he still, say, standing alone with his armies from the old Lahmed kingdom, or is he now having alliances with people as far as the south? Because they've been friends for 20 years.
I think he's united a good portion of the Arab Peninsula has been united under him, and he's got support from Iraq as well. He's got support from Egypt as well. So he's got that area under his control, if you like, or at least in alliance with him. But then he's assassinated.
Pre-caliphate, but he doesn't own the lands, he doesn't rule the lands, but he has all of his friends in many different areas. So they are all, say, on the same page. They are not going to attack each other, and they are going to also help each other whenever they want to go on a
good political alliance. He has a strong political alliance with the whole of the Arabian Peninsula, with Iraq and with Egypt and Syria. So it's a strong political alliance. But as I said, he's assassinated. But I think he did appoint his successor. So the next person is of the same mind as him, even though he was killed. So the next successor continues his work. So he clearly appointed who his successor should be. His successor is clearly in alliance also with Ali, who is Hani ibn Qabisa, still alive and still ruling in Hira, where he historically has been throughout this whole time. And after Uthman, there's a person called Uthman. I don't think he's called Uthman. I think he's called the Tajik, to be honest. After him, we have Hani ibn Qabisa comes along and very briefly, at least, takes control of the situation. But we have really run out of time for this show, so we'll have to continue this conversation another time, and we'll pick up at that time. Where would you like to pick up next time? Would you like to do this again?
Yes, that would be great. I'm going to actually start putting together lots of questions, things that say appear in the narrative, which are a little bit odd, to see if we can make sense of those. But if we can pick up exactly in this very exact spot, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I think it would be very helpful if we just carry on having our little chats together, and other people who like to listen in can listen in, and maybe they can also post some questions underneath. If you have been listening and you've enjoyed it, please do post some questions underneath, hopefully before next week, or at least before the next time JC and I get together and have a chat. We can have a look at your questions as well and bring them into the discussion if necessary. I would like to thank JC for joining me today. I think you've really helped clarify this period of time, and I look forward to further conversations with you. I have only one comment here in the question. We have a greeting here from somebody saying, this is from HH saying, "May God bless you both in the fight against evil Islam." And there is also a good Islam, which we hope to present to you, a historical and truth-based Islam. But yeah, the evil Islam is the Abbasid Islam, which has hidden and buried all of this truth under layers of falsehood. Thank you for your comment, HH. And we also have somebody called Jewish who says, if you keep reading, it says to take the Messiah as Lord with Allah. That's right. The verse does say that they have taken their... That's the verse, chapter 9, verse 30, where it says they have taken their Echbarhum and Rahmanhum as lords instead of God and the Messiah, is exactly what it says. So it means that you have to take God and Messiah as your Lord, not your teacher. So thank you for that. Yeah, that's exactly what it says. And then we have somebody called Amr 112 at the tube says, I think that the reason there is no historical Muhammad is Islam was whitewashed, where the assassination of Uthman was turned into the night of the Hijrah, and the name Muhammad was an embellishment. Well, it's a long story. I do recommend, Amr, if you try to watch some of the other videos, and I recommend you get hold of a book by Robert Hoyland, which it's called Seeing Islam as Others Saw It, and it's got a lot of references in there which you should read through before you formulate any kind of opinion on this. Definitely read that book. If you can get hold of another book called Diversity and Rabbanization, that's also quite helpful in understanding the origins of the whole thing. But definitely the Abbasids created what we know today as the religion of Islam was created by the Abbasids in the 8th century, in the latter half of the 8th century. And onwards, and what we're talking about is the 7th century, the early half of the 7th century, and trying to understand what was on the ground at that time, even before the Umayyads came along. And so it's all a big mess, but it's not indecipherable. We can get to the bottom of it if we are careful. And I'm very grateful to JC for coming along and helping clarify this story. I don't think we would get there without your help. So do like and subscribe if you like the video. Don't forget to click that like button and the subscribe and the notification bell so you make sure you can hear when we're on again. We don't always talk about Islam on this channel, but when we do, we get to the bottom of things. So please do post your questions, and we look forward to having you back on the show with us again in the future. Thank you, JC. God bless you all.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to our next conversations.
Me too. Okay, take care, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.